Space Heating and Air in Irwin.
Welcome back. It's Tri-Cities Sports Now. I'm Marky Billson. I wanted to tell you this about Randy Moss. We got to Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens never beat ETSU when he was at Chattanooga. Not on the gridiron. I think that the Mox basketball team, he probably did get some minutes in there. Maybe I get to see what the basketball stats were if he ever had any buckets. But yeah, Terrell Owens, although he did play basketball at Chattanooga, he was a bench warmer. He said, I looked up his stats. He never, I think, he would average 2 points a game, and he'd play at garbage time. He'd play during, let's say, I mentioned this. I saw one year when he played, he got into an NCAA tournament game, and I'm repeating myself now for late listeners, but it was a blowout loss to Connecticut. He got a blocked shot in garbage time. And that was Terrell Owens. No, didn't score, got a blocked shot there. Somehow I think that his NFL accomplishments, his 16 NFL records, he's going to hold those a little bit higher than the blocked shot he had in garbage time against Connecticut in the NCAA tournament. But what did Randy Moss do? Now, like I said, 2 former Southern Conference players, Moss from Marshall and Owens from Chattanooga, making the Pro Football Hall of Fame on Saturday. Moss, who had a few more records, I count, he says 21 receiving records still in the books, set 22, but 21 are still in the books for Moss. There's 16 for Owens. And a lot of it is just like stupid stuff, like most consecutive years with 3 touchdown receptions. What kind of a record is that, It's not like catching 23 scores in a year like Moss did the one year, But regardless, remember, Moss was originally going to go to Notre Dame. Then he was going to go to Florida State. And, he had drug issues, and he was expelled from school, and he wound up the Rand, Virginia native at Marshall. That was the school that was going to give him a chance. And Marshall at the time was making the transition from what was then called Division I AA to 1A. They were making the transition. I think they played originally in the MAC, Mid-American Conference, before winding up in Conference USA. Anyway, what happened was that Marshall, their last year in Division I AA, now FCS, they played at ETSU. And it was, I think it might have been the biggest ETSU football game, more hype for that football game than any ETSU game I can remember, save for maybe the game against Kennesaw State in which the program was renewed back in 2015. Other than that, the Randy Moss game, it was a sellout at the Mini Dome. Now, half the fans were Thundering Herd fans from Marshall. We ought to point that out. But even so, it was televised locally, and at the time I also was working at 1420 NBC Sports Radio Tri-Cities. And here's the circumstance. 1420 NBC, it was called it was different, I had a sports talk show, but it was a different format and so on. It was not branded at the time, 1420 NBC Sports Radio Tri-Cities. Call letters were still WEMB, standing for Wisely Employing Marky Billson, by the way. And it was huge. It was this big play. And it wasn't so much that Moss, I think, was the star player. Chad Pennington was the quarterback at Marshall. At the time, there had been no Marshall players that ever had made the NFL. And they wound up with a guy who would become a good starting quarterback for the Jets in Pennington, from Knoxville, actually, and Randy Moss from, rural West Virginia. And it was quite the passing combo. Randy Moss played 2 years at Marshall. There was never a game in which he didn't score a touchdown. But ETSU held him off the board until the fourth quarter. Of course, by that time, the Bucks were trailing Marshall. And it was, by the way, a game that had 2 top 10 in the Division I AA rankings at the time, because it was arguably ETSU's best ever season. It was 96. Some would argue 69, the Grantland Rice Bowl team, and I think that that would probably be what most people would say. But I remember Mark Peace up in Kingsport TV announcer. He actually said that ETSU, the 96 team, was their best ever. Anyway, give you this. It was 27-3 with 11:28 left in the game. I guess you could conceivably think, well, there's field position here. You can get 3 touchdowns and 3 two-point conversions. You can put it into overtime, but that really is wishful thinking. And Moss hit on a 72-yard touchdown reception in the fourth quarter from a backup quarterback to keep his touchdown streak alive. And as I said, Moss would score a touchdown in every game he ever played, the 2 years he played with the Thundering Herd. Moss's stats that day were exceptional. 6 catches, 155 yards, a touchdown catch. That touchdown pass made it 34-3. ETSU had a 3-0 lead at one time in that game. It's 10-3 at halftime. When Moss scored that touchdown in 96 against the Bucks, I was right here in this studio doing the sports talk show. I think I called it the press box at the time. Maybe I had it going, press box. But here we go. So it's 11:28 left in the fourth quarter, and Moss scores on his 72-yard touchdown pass. 6 catches, 155 yards. Only one game he ever played at ETSU. Like I said, the next year Marshall was 1A, so they didn't play ETSU anymore. That ball game, by the way, set an attendance record for ETSU football. More than 13,000 fans, not a seat to be had, at the Mini-Dome. And it wasn't until 2016 in the Battle of Bristol, the second game, the featured game, the Tennessee Virginia Tech, that was just the matinee, right? And the second game, that was the featured one, right? Well, that one drew just shy of 14,000, so by a few hundred fans, ETSU set their attendance record that day against Western Carolina. But previously, it was the day Randy Moss came in. Anyway, just some things to talk about on Tri-City Sports Now. How the Hall of Famers did against ETSU. Randy Moss did a little bit better than Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens never beat ETSU when he was with the Mocs. What do you think about that? There are some people who do not think that Josh McDaniels will ever beat anyone else as a head coach. And the reason why are the shocking developments where McDaniels kind of did a Bobby Crimmins in South Carolina. Remember that? Only he still had a job at Georgia Tech. There was a period of time where Bobby Crimmins, he was introduced as the head coach of the South Carolina Gamecocks. He had played there, but he had a lot of success at Georgia Tech. Anyway, he was introduced, I think it was 93 this happened, and he went to South Carolina. It was brand new in the SEC, and this was going to make their program and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, after the press conference, Crimmins says, you know what, no, I'd rather go to Georgia Tech. I'd rather still be there. No, I don't want the South Carolina job. It was that way with Josh McDaniels, only he'd rather be the offensive coordinator of the Patriots than the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. What is up with that? Well, here is the circumstance. Adam Schefter of ESPN, he's an insider, and here's his skinny on what went on with Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, and McDaniels. Maybe.
know, for people he hasn't worked with.
Okay, let me try this again. My apologies here. We had the mic turned down. So we're going to try this one. My apologies here. We're going to try this one more time. The mic was turned down. Apologies. Bob Kraft spoke with Josh McDaniels.
Cold feet came about from a variety of circumstances, not the least of which is over the last couple of days, the Krafts, who own the Patriots, went to Josh McDaniels and conveyed how much they wanted him to stay, how much they appreciated his contributions, how much he meant to the franchise this and in future seasons.
Interesting. Plus, now the interesting thing also is that Greg Schiano is rumored to replace Matt Patricia as the the defensive coordinator of the Patriots. And I mentioned this on Monday, that if that happens, then you know what? Tennessee, they've got to, because they're the team that scorned Greg Schiano. No, we don't want him to be that coach. There's supposedly no heir apparent plan for either McDaniel, who used to be an NFL coach, with the Broncos, or a Schiano, if he is in fact hired as the defensive coordinator, for either one of them to be the heir apparent for Bill Belichick. Here's what Adam Schefter had to say about that.
They made a commitment to Josh McDaniels. They're going to redo his contract. But the truth of the matter is, nobody knows exactly how long Bill Belichick is going to be coaching for. He gets to coach as long as he wants to coach.
He's 66. And yeah, he could break Don Shula's all-time record for victories. Of course, he's got more Super Bowls than Chuck Noll now, so he's got that record. So does he need the record for most victories? I don't. Belichick is a football historian. My guess is that he would like to have both records. All right. Now, there is the thing about this McDaniel going to Indianapolis and going to staying at New England and all that, is that he had been talking to a lot of coaches out there and said, you're going to be my assistant. Assistant with the Cowboys, is going to be his defensive coordinator. I mean, and remember also that supposedly McDaniel was the first choice for the Tennessee Titans, but no, I've given my word to the Colts. So that's how Mike Vrabel got into the fold for the Titans. This really isn't looking real good. Then again, consider how Bill Belichick got to be the coach of the Patriots. I mean, yeah, he had been the coach of the Jets twice and had never coached a game. So strange things happen in coaching trees when Bill Belichick is part of the trunk.
Josh had already started hiring assistants, according to reports, who were already starting to work. But now you have guys who now are planning on working in a system with Josh McDaniels who now aren't going to work in that system. And whoever the Plan B and Plan C and Plan D coaches are, now they come in and are saddled with coaches who maybe they don't know either.
That's Louis Riddick, NFL insider from ESPN. Now then, the idea here, and Riddick had these ideas about reasons to stay for McDaniels. It really is a shocking move. However, he also theorizes the chances of being an NFL head coach again, I don't know.
We don't know what exactly his reasons are. There's been people who've been talking about it. And everybody has a right to change their mind. Just know that it comes with consequences now as far as people looking at you maybe unfavorably. And you better have a pretty rock-solid situation as far as where you're going to go back to, because you've made it very difficult on yourself. Let's just put it out there.
And there's also the feeling that loyalty was broken.
Loyalty is a big thing. Trust is a...
As you heard right there. Okay. Of course, it's been a horrible week for the Indianapolis Colts. Edwin Jackson was killed by a drunk driver, a linebacker for the Colts. Chris Ballard is the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts, and this is what he had to say about an athlete dying young.
I sat in yesterday with Matthias Farley, who I just absolutely love. Everything Matthias Farley stands for, and we shed tears together about Edwin and what Edwin stood for, the type of kid he was, the type of man he is, how he wanted to be great at football, how he wanted to make a difference in other people's lives, and that's important. And it's important that we remember him for the things he stood for, and we will as an organization.
Of course, it came out that the person that ran over Edwin Jackson is in the country illegally and was driving drunk. And, well, it's going to be hard not to politicize that. However, and I'm a little surprised about this take, Ryan Burrow, who is a prosecutor, he had this to say about the death of Edwin Jackson.
Federal charges against a man who allegedly killed an NFL player and an Uber driver. I'm ABC's Ryan Burrow with that story coming up.
Well, I have it here sooner or later. Now, where is that story? I'm looking at Robert Burrow right here. It says it's coming up. And where is it? Calling up. I thought that we had it right there. I do apologize for that. The prosecutor, it says here, here we are, Ryan Burrow.
Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry is calling President Trump's remarks on the arrest of a man and the deaths of Colts linebacker Edwin Jackson and Uber driver Jeffrey Monroe ghoulish and inappropriate public commentary. Curry is building the case against the 37-year-old who's been charged with 4 felony counts. President Trump tweeting out Tuesday about the fatal crash, saying it was so disgraceful that Jackson and the driver were killed by someone who was in the U.S. illegally. The president also calling for Democrats to work with him on illegal immigration and border security. Ryan Burrow, ABC News.
You know, all due respect to the prosecutor, I do think that this story is going to give a lot of momentum to deport illegal immigrants. Certainly, you have a pro football player who was killed by a drunk driver who is an illegal immigrant. How could there not be? Goes hand in hand. And for a prosecutor to then call out Trump for saying, I just don't agree with that. So make it that point right there. Yeah. And in a league, I mean, I'm driving down the highway and I'm seeing an SUV that has boycott the NFL bumper stickers or window stickers, as the case may be, on its back. And let me tell you something, what the prosecutor, I mean, no. If the NFL, and you hate to use a man as a pawn, a deceased figure, but yeah, that's going to attract some attention of, you know what, if that person wasn't here illegally, Edwin Jackson might still be alive. There's going to be that feeling, and yeah, that's something that right now, $89 million to social justice causes, backing Colin Kaepernick. That should not be what the NFL go. They should not go down that road. Of course, the death was so traumatic that the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts, and after McDaniels backed out, said, you know what, coaching searches, last thing on my mind.
To be very honest with you, after Sunday's events, with the passing of Edwin Jackson and Jeffrey Monroe, was a very tough 2 days, and my thoughts were not even close to this head coaching search. My thoughts were with Edwin and Jeffrey and their families and the tragic death that occurred on Sunday morning.
Now, here's one reason why I think McDaniels may not have wanted to go to Indianapolis. It's the Colts. It's the Irsays. I know Robert Irsay has passed away, but Jim Irsay, an apple doesn't fall that far from the tree. Don't let anybody tell you it doesn't. And this is a guy that actually, started criticizing Peyton Manning after his career with the Colts was over. Only one Super Bowl for us, Peyton, there. You'd never won one before since 1971. You'd never won one before. Actually, I say you. Not Carol Rosenblum owned the Colts back then. They were in Baltimore. Yeah. I retweeted a fan had something really funny to say. It must stink for the Ursays to be told one thing by an individual and then see him turn around and do another. Geez, I mean, you wouldn't think that the Ursays could understand that now, could you? But yeah, it's still the Ursays. There are good organizations and there are bad organizations. There are the Crafts. There are the Rooneys. And then there are the Stan Kroenkes and the Robert Ursays and the Dean Spanoses and the Jed Yorks and maybe, just maybe, the Mark Davises. For a long time, there was the Bill Bidwells. I'm not so sure that there aren't the Jerry Joneses. Some will say the Dan Snyders. They're not the Maras. No, not at all. And when you look at that, you have to consider, ownership. And I'm just thinking the McDaniels sort of said, okay, do I really want to work for the Ursays? I remember years ago, Paul Zimmerman saying the team that I would least like to work for in the whole NFL, Indianapolis Colts. I know a lot has changed since those days, but have they? It's still the same ownership, still the Ursays. And I wouldn't want to work for that family. Got to tell you, I'd much rather work for the Crafts. Tri-City Sports Now. Who will coach? The final thought on this. The Indianapolis Colts going forward. Top candidates are gone, but here's what Adam Schefter has to say about who could be coaching the Colts in the future.
Candidates that they interviewed during the first round of interviews was Baylor head coach Matt Rule. He's got signing day today. Maybe they get through that and the Colts talk to him again. Jim Schwartz, John DiFilippo from Philadelphia, maybe Dave Tobe, the special teams coach from Kansas City.
Yeah, those Philly assistants, you heard the quarterback's coach, but what about the former backup quarterback, Frank Reich? Remember him with the Bills and for that matter the Jets and too? The Eagles assistants were supposed to be really hot, and I'm surprised that, you say that, to tell you the truth, I would rather, considering the Belichick coaching tree and the lack of success his assistants have had in the NFL, I would much rather have someone like Frank Reich than I would Josh McDaniel. You heard me. And besides, didn't the Eagles win a game? Maybe a blessing in disguise for the Colts, who, yes, a lot of people in Baltimore despise. Then again, we don't really know the health status of Andrew Luck now, do we? Tri-City Sports Now, I'm coming back. A final thought after this.
Ketchup. Taco Bell shakes up the game, only to expose a web of fries.
Fries seasoned in Mexican